The Cyber Spy by Nathan Holden. A mystery suspense political thriller. Audiobook Book 1. Edited by Buzz Books and Beyond. Narrated by InVideo. Story length 21 minutes. While sitting in the satellite office of the Central Intelligence Agency, Gill's heart hurt from the recent events, and the choking feeling in his throat wouldn't go away. He'd arrived in the United States without incident. MIT, his new employer, provided him with the necessary paperwork to travel from Lagos, Nigeria, to Cambridge, Massachusetts. He would be a guest lecturer in the computer science department at MIT. Now he was sitting in the CIA's office remembering the day when his life changed forever. A strange African man approached him outside his apartment just outside the MIT campus. The stranger started the conversation with light pleasantries. "Good afternoon, Master Osei. It's such a pleasant day here in America," he said in a calm voice. "Good afternoon. Do I know you?" Gill responded. "No, I'm sure that you don't. But you know the organization I represent." The conversation turned dark when the man informed Gill that his family was being held captive and would be safe as long as he followed the group's demands. The man provided Gill with evidence of his family's capture. The man's cell phone video showed his mother, father, and younger sister in a small room. Gill reached for the phone, but the man quickly pulled it back as his cold, dark, and lifeless eyes stared at Gill. He then went into his pocket and gave Gill a burner phone. His request was simple. Once Gill delivered a working prototype of a remote mechanism that could trigger a remote bomb using a cell phone, undetectable by airport security, his family would be released. After the man walked away, Gill was in a daze as his mind replayed everything the man said to him. He felt like he was in a bad dream. His legs were weak and he could hardly breathe. But somehow Gill made it up the stairs to his small apartment. With sweat and tears running down his face, he wondered what to do next. His heart was pounding as he threw his briefcase on the bed and reached for the telephone. Remembering all that he knew about telephones, he immediately hung the phone up, realizing his apartment was probably bugged and privacy, for him, was a thing in his past. Sweat was flowing from his pores as he experienced deep pain in the pit of his stomach. The combination of fear mixed with anger was overwhelming for a few seconds. His palms were sweating, which made things worse when he tried to wipe the tears and sweat from his eyes. His body was large in stature as he had taken after his father, yet he felt like a small child. Gill allowed his raw emotions to dominate his feelings for several more minutes before he employed his intellect and decided to find a way out of a terrible situation. He was determined to be smarter than evil. He decided to take a walk, and perhaps he could think clearer if he was in the cool, brisk air on that October day. If his cell phone and landline telephone couldn't be trusted, he would have to use other devices to find a solution to his problem. Heading out the door and using the stairs to reach the front door of the apartment building, Gill was in a daze. He was aware of the most recent events in Nigeria surrounding extremist Muslims and the disappearance of young Nigerian girls. He understood that the organization was dangerous. His heart ached from the memory of the cell phone video the Nigerian man had shown him. He wanted the events of the past 2 hours to be a dream, but he knew better. The good news was that the terrorist gave him 3 months to provide a working prototype. 3 months would be enough time to provide them with what they wanted or find his family. One thing was for sure. He needed help. Gill found himself in the college library. Surely his research couldn't be traced there. As his fingers touched the keyboard, his mind was confused. The American police couldn't help him. The authorities in Nigeria couldn't or wouldn't help him unless he paid a large sum of money, and even then, what the terrorist wanted was so important that maybe no amount of money could stop them. Gill felt helpless. An internal mountain of anger formed within his belly. The rage he felt inside frightened him. His parents and younger sister, located in a small room, probably had little food. Yet Gill was determined to stay on the positive side of life if possible. Gill understood the level of a man's intelligence was defined by his ability to control his emotions. He was determined not to lose himself. As he surfed the internet with no particular subject in mind, he thought about how to build the device the terrorist wanted. He thinks about what would be needed to make the device work. Then the image of hundreds of innocent people dying came into his thoughts and tore through his mind. Gill felt as if he was dying little by little within himself. He would never be the same man again. He would forever be assigned to the dark side of life. He would never know joy, laughter, or happiness again, and if he lived, he probably would be used repeatedly for evil. He loved his family, and there was no doubt he needed to find a way to save them. Yet more than that, he needed to save himself. He wondered if being highly educated made him more self-preserving. What if they killed his family after he delivered the device? He'd have to include a way to abort the mission if his family wasn't safe. He wondered if he could accomplish the task. Was it even possible? After sitting at the computer and staring at different sites with little to no connection to his problem, his fingers typed in the letters http://cia.gov, and within a split second he was where he needed to be. And almost just as quickly, he backed out of the Central Intelligence Agency's website and put in the words CIA offices plus Cambridge, Massachusetts. Gill realized he would need to play cat and mouse game for his plan to work. He understood he needed to collaborate with other knowledgeable people who understood his plight. The CIA understood these matters more than he, and they were trained to deal with the impossible. Gill decided that he would be absent from work the next day due to illness. His day would start at the medical facility, as he would try to confuse anyone who might be following him. The following day went as planned. Early in the morning, Gill called MIT Human Resources and reported his illness. He received a recommendation to visit a medical facility. The medical facility was extremely prompt, and his visit was in and out of the doctor's office within 90 minutes. Once the doctor was sure he wasn't a victim of Ebola or some other African disease, Gill received medication to help calm his stomach and eliminate the flu-like symptoms. Upon leaving the clinic, Gill headed out the back way and doubled back to a bus stop 3 blocks from the clinic. But again, he saw no evidence of being followed unless they were of European descent. He already knew the Central Intelligence Agency didn't have an office in the area, therefore he needed to fly to Washington, D.C. to visit the local office. Going to Langley was out of the question. The short flight to Washington, D.C. made Gill nervous. He was worried the terrorist would be watching. He felt more comfortable after the aircraft landed. Concerned that his cell phone was compromised, he used the public telephones to call the CIA district office. The words, "I am a computer expert. My family has been kidnapped. They want me to build a remote bomb," placed his telephone call in urgent status. He deliberately provided keywords in the conversation to let the receptionist know his information was authentic and severe. He was sure the call was recorded. Gill spoke to 3 people before receiving instructions and information on how to get to the satellite office. When he arrived at the office building, he was surprised to find the CIA's office in an unmarked suite in a small office building several miles from the White House. A special trip to CIA's headquarters at Langley was out of the question, he kept telling himself. There wasn't time. The small satellite office would have to do. Gill went through a series of security detection devices before being allowed on the elevator to the unmarked office. When the receptionist asked him to state his business, Gill was direct and tried to make sure his accent didn't confuse the message. "I'm a computer engineer. Terrorists in Nigeria have kidnapped my family, and they want me to build a remote bomb to go on a commercial aircraft." The receptionist was calm, but Gill could tell his statement put a sense of urgency into her daily activities. "Yes, we've been expecting you. Please take a seat and someone will be with you immediately. Can I offer you a cup of coffee?" "Yes, please," Gill responded. He didn't drink coffee, but he needed to say yes to show his willingness to cooperate. A second woman delivered a cup of coffee with cream and sugar to him in the reception area as he waited. She was an African-American woman with short afro and large hoop earrings. Somehow, Gill knew the earrings were gold. She reminded him of his sister in Nigeria. Her smile was warm, and she made Gill remember he was without a love interest in his life. He wondered if his thoughts were a good sign. How could he be thinking about a woman sexually during this crisis? Again, Gill wondered if he was a different man when he first left Nigeria for school in New Zealand. New Zealand wasn't exactly Western education, but it wasn't strict Muslim education either. Gill took the thoughts of finding a mate as a sign that his life would be normal again. Finding a suitable wife would be on his personal agenda. Born with the eyes of the tiger, the women in the village where he grew up viewed him differently from the others in his village who had dark skin and dark eyes. His hazel green eyes could always see things that others could not. Gill put the sugar and cream into the coffee as a regular coffee drinker. The African-American woman was now sitting in the receptionist's seat. She smiled and continued with her work, but Gill could tell she watched his every move. He wondered if she had a weapon concealed in her desk and would shoot him if he made a sudden move. He sipped the hot coffee slowly and enjoyed the taste. Suddenly, a medium-height white male came through the office door. "Mr. Osei, my name is Mr. J. I understand you have a unique situation?" The man looked nothing like the CIA agents in the movie. Gill was surprised by the commonality of the man to everyday people. Gill didn't understand his thought process, but his confidence in the CIA was reduced. Where was the James Bond type of agent? "Yes, sir," Gill replied. "Follow me," the man demanded. Gill stood up to follow the man and kept his cup of coffee with him. It was clear why he'd gone through metal detectors before being allowed up to the offices. The CIA was already reasonably sure he didn't have a weapon hidden under his garments. Gill followed the man into a small office. The door shut behind them, and Mr. J asked Gill to explain the situation from the beginning. Gill became frightened. What if this so-called CIA would not allow him to do anything? What if they let his family be killed? For a second, Gill felt stupid because he trusted a Western agency knowing so little about them. "Don't worry, Mr. Osei. We'll do everything in our power to help you and your family." It was almost like the agent was reading Gill's mind. Mr. J took notes as Gill explained the situation, starting with college in New Zealand. Mr. J then left the room. Gill didn't see any cameras in the room, but he knew the CIA was recording his every move, so he sat quietly and continued to sip on the cold cup of coffee. Mr. J re-entered the room after about 15 minutes. "Mr. Osei, or may I call you Gill?" "Yes, Gill is fine. We have analysts working on your situation now. They will let us know within a couple of hours what our next step will be. So can I offer you another cup of coffee and a choice of magazines, business, sports, pretty girls?" Gill laughed and replied, "Business will be fine." Gill deliberately didn't respond to the answer about the coffee. After about 3 minutes, the African-American woman came into the small office with a stack of the latest business magazines. She also brought another hot cup of coffee with cream and sugar. Then, unwilling to engage in conversation, she slipped out of the office as quickly as she came in. Gill looked at the magazines but couldn't concentrate on the content. He was worried about his family. He was even more concerned that he trusted a Western government agency to protect himself and his family. Gill waited for almost 2 hours before Mr. J returned. Finally, when Mr. J returned, another man returned with him. The second man looked like James Bond and introduced himself only as the analyst. He took control of the conversation and explained the plan to get Gill's family back. The men talked about Gill's abilities to complete the task required of him. They discussed an override mechanism that would be fail-proof. They also informed Gill they would attempt to extract the family once the false news appeared on Nigerian television of a terrorist attack on an aircraft. Gill could tell the agency was more interested in who the mastermind behind the plan was. It wasn't like his family didn't matter, but Gill could tell his family wasn't the priority. Instead, discovering who was behind this act of war was the priority. Gill received his second surprise of the day about himself when he realized he understood the agency's position. If these types of men could blow up transportation systems at will, the world would be in trouble, not just he and his family. From the time Gill entered the front door of the small office until 3 hours and 40 minutes later, the agency checked on his background, his apartment at MIT, his family in Nigeria, and MIT Human Resources. They purchased an airline ticket to return to Boston and swept his apartment for bugs while placing their own surveillance devices in and around the property. After Gill received special and detailed instructions from the CIA, they rushed him back to the Washington, D.C. airport, where he boarded a flight back to Boston. There was one thought Gill couldn't shake, yet he dared not ask. He knew better. The agency men talked like they knew exactly where his family was. Gill thought about the satellite images the analyst left on the table in a folder marked classified. He realized the agency already had eyes on the terrorist plot, but didn't have details until he walked into their office. The analyst was the brains behind the CIA planning, and Gill's confidence level in the CIA was restored. The agency would extract his family once they'd targeted the masterminds behind the attack. Several days after his secret visit with the CIA, sweat was still rolling down Gill's face as he completed the schematic plans required by the agency. The agency arranged for him to have time off from MIT to complete the groundwork for the mission. He wasn't sure what lie they gave his employer, but it worked. He still received his regular paycheck while working on the CIA project from home. The CIA would ultimately build the device but needed Gill's input on what the device required. After all, the device was like the device he designed in college. The mechanism would include a trigger that would work from anywhere in the world. However, the device would dismantle itself after 10 seconds. The idea was to make the terrorists believe the bomb would go off. It would be up to the news agencies in certain areas to encourage the group to believe their mission was a success. The entire plan was tricky because the agency would have 30 seconds to determine the target's location. Getting this information was crucial to undermining the terrorists. The CIA took delivery of Gill's notes and schematics before assembling the device, which included a lot of the specs from Gill's New Zealand project. The CIA instructed Gill to use the burner phone number to meet with the cold, dark man who first approached him. Gill was frightened to contact the man but had no choice. The man was without a conscience and honestly reminded Gill of his father, even more frightening. Gill used the burner phone number to meet with the man who first approached him. When the man showed up to pick up the packages, he simply said, "Thank you," and left the front steps of Gill's apartment building. "What about my family?" Gill shouted. "After the job is done, after the job is done," the man repeated without ever turning around. The wait was emotionally painful. Neither Gill nor the agency had any idea how long it would be before the terrorist would attempt to use the remote device. This was a crucial time for the agency, on edge over a possible second attack on American soil. Gill could only guess other government agencies were notified but not told of the entire plot. The man who picked up the package was followed. The man whom he gave the package to in New York City was followed. They lost the man and the device in Europe. It seems the man who boarded the flight at JFK disguised himself before the flight landed in Paris. This is the only information provided to Gill, who understood the CIA knew more but weren't willing to share. Gill tried to contact his family but had no luck. Finally, a distant relative told him they were okay but seemed distant. Gill's cousin reported that no one had seen his sister for weeks and wanted to know if she was with Gill. Gill didn't divulge what he knew and was concerned the terrorist held his sister hostage and allowed his mother and father to report to work each day. Then it happened. The command cell phone activated for a moment in the Middle East. Several weeks before, the command phone was linked to the relay cell phone's location in Northern Europe. The two L phones were in sync. The relay cell phone was aboard an international flight headed to JFK Airport from Tel Aviv. The second cell phone carried by a passenger on the aircraft turned off and on several times before the flight landed. Several moments after the flight landed, the two phones synced up for a more extended period. The agency pushed the override button and the explosives were disarmed. The local news media in Nigeria reported the incident, and the global news accidentally picked up on the information and falsely aired the attempt as an actual occurrence. As a result, false images given to the Nigerian news media ended up on global TV networks. There was enough confusion to warrant such a mistake by the news agencies. The satellite images proved correct. The analyst who intentionally allowed Gill to see the photos was right. His sister and other families were held captive 100 miles outside of Abuja in a remote area. In the future, Gill would learn of his father's connection with the kidnapping. While the world was trying to figure out if there was an actual explosion or an attempt, the agency sent in an extraction team to free Gill's family and was surprised to find only his sister. Nevertheless, the mission yielded important information surrounding the connections between terrorist groups in Africa and groups in other parts of the world. Gill's family was flown back to the United States for safety following CIA protocol. The agency terminated Gill's employment at MIT, and his invitation to become a U.S. citizen suddenly occurred. The result was that the CIA wanted Gill to work for the CIA. They were unwilling to allow a man with Gill's talents to roam the high-tech community without supervision, yet they never said it. The offer was a silent demand, and Gill, whose real name is Gill Osei, understood. Gill's decision to work for the Central Intelligence Agency wasn't exactly the future he envisioned for himself or his family. yet he felt obligated to help those who helped him. He'd be able to work with the latest high-tech toys in the world. He understood it was an offer he would never be allowed to refuse. Gill's training with the CIA was long and extensive. It was predetermined that he'd join the Science and Technology Department under Special Activities of the CIA. After the kidnapping, his family was relocated to South Carolina. Osei Sr. was upset, because he could never return to Nigeria, while his mother and younger sister appeared to be adjusting to their new home. Gill's priority was to finish his training and learn how to stay safe in a world full of uncertainty. Having been born and raised in Nigeria and educated in New Zealand, he was often concerned about fitting in with other native English-speaking recruits, yet nothing could have prepared him for the cultural clashes. Understanding why Americans do what they do was challenging for Gill, who had problems understanding why students in the training were matched up against one another. Each student was supposed to be working for a common cause, the gathering of information for the sole purpose of keeping the country safe. Gill believed this competitive attitude would carry over into their work ethics at the agency. He would later learn how effective this method of training was. Fortunate for Gill, his duties would include technology spying more than being a James Bond-type spy. His focus would be on cybercrime. He'd be James Bond on the computer, and this thought made him smile. Gill was good at everything during his CIA training, except skydiving. If he didn't pass the skydiving test, he wouldn't be able to join the agency. He spent the better half of 2 weeks trying to overcome his fear of jumping out of a plane. His stomach turned upside down each time the instructor spoke about skydiving. Gill listened to the instructor's instructions and memorized them, yet the fear persisted. He felt there was something wrong with jumping out of a safe airplane. The instructor must have felt Gill's fears because he explained in detail what the entire class already understood. Once the instructor explained the reason for the training, Gill felt more relaxed. Even if he was frightened, the need to know how to safely jump out of a plane was far greater than his fear. His life could very well depend on him being able to jump and land at a specific location within range. For Gill, the overall training was effective. It revealed his weaknesses and his strengths. During his childhood, Gill was considered privileged, since he was the son of a banker and a schoolteacher. Working for the bank in Nigeria was a prestigious position, and Gill's father used his position to help Gill get a college scholarship. Gill remembered those times when his father would take him to work with him. The young Gill would spend his day on the computer at the bank. During that time, none of the bank employees relied on the computers. If information was important, bank employees used paper and pencil. The girls in his village said he was pleasing to look at. Gill's hazel green eyes had a lot to do with their summary of his looks. At 6 feet, in American measurement, he was considered tall and handsome. For Gill, joining the CIA wasn't exactly an offer as much as it was a strong request, which Gill knew better than to refuse. Like many agency employees, Gill was exceptionally talented and fluent in 3 languages before joining the agency, thus he felt comfortable with his qualifications. Attractive, shapely, sexy, mature woman are the words Gill used to describe his new handler, who was his case manager at the CIA. Gill, aka Osei, knew they made her his supervisor because no one else could handle her. He wondered what made them think he could. Shelley was professional enough. She resorted to flirting whenever there was a gap between her wishes and your desire to give her what she wanted. Her long blonde unruly hair was her trademark. Gill jokingly believed himself to be a brown boy toy, doing what Shelley told him. There were rumors surrounding Shelley, which Gill didn't believe. Shelley didn't give sex away. Shelley was a do-what-I-say, and you might get some of this type of woman. Shelley was a professional teaser. Coming out of the foster care system in Virginia, she beat the odds and finished college on a scholarship from the agency. Her secret distrust in men is probably what propelled her career. She was the type of woman most men wanted but could never tame. She was independent, confident, and manipulative, with a schoolgirl attitude towards most men. The next morning, Gill arrived to work a little late. He lived on the southeast side of D.C. Sure, it was a rough neighborhood, but he felt comfortable there, plus, he didn't have people asking him what he did for a living. His neighbors didn't care who he worked for as long as he brought beer to the Friday night bid whisk party. On most Friday evenings, he worked late and paid the liquor store to deliver beer to the card party. Shelley was sitting at his desk when he arrived. "Osei, I've got an assignment for you. Step into my office," she said in her professional voice. This meant something was up and it was serious. "Yes, sir," Gill replied as he quickly followed her, doubling back to pick up a pad and ink pen. Once inside her office, Shelley turned on the electronic wall projector and proceeded to brief Gill. "Are you familiar with a place called Tool?" she asked. Isn't that where the Army Chemical Depot stores deadly nerve agents?" Gill replied slowly. He could tell Shelley was impressed. She continued to speak. "During the Gulf War they did find weapons of mass destruction. The public was never told because then they would have wanted to know the details." Shelley wasn't telling Gill anything he hadn't suspected. Shelley continued, "A couple of days ago, the computer system which secures access to the chemical weapons department was hacked. Nothing was taken, but whoever is behind the breach wanted the US government to know they'd broken in." "Why is the FBI not handling this?" Gill asked, already knowing the answer. "Because they couldn't find the breach. They're at a loss. And since there was an indication of one IP address originating in London, they called us in." Shelley knew this was Gill's first assignment and there was so much information he didn't know or didn't have, yet he maintained a composure of confidence. Finally, Shelley slowly reached across the desk and picked up a folder which she handed to him. "All the information is in this folder," she said. "Do you have any questions?" she asked. "Not now, but please may I approach you later today with any questions?" he asked. "Sure, I'll block a few minutes off this afternoon, say around 3:30. If you have questions, I'll meet you here. If not, I'll expect some progress. Oh yes, if you need to travel, contact the travel department, they'll set you up. All the information is in the file." Shelley walked out of her own office, leaving Gill sitting there with a file folder in his hand. That was her way of saying the meeting was over. Most managers stood up and waited for you to leave their office. Not Shelley. Gill worked with a 2-man team to help him with the grunt work. His job was to locate, eliminate, and secure any hacks which were deemed a threat to US security. Akinlana, Gill, Osei was good at his job. Osei had an even deadlier skill. He could look at a potential problem and devise ways to hack the program. More and more Shelley called him Osei, not Gill. It would be several weeks before she'd share why she insisted he use his African name. Osei's new assignment occurred on the same morning the IRS admitted to someone hacking their website and running off with 100,000 taxpayer files. It was crucial that the IRS breach was fixed as soon as possible. The thought of someone hacking into the chemical weapons depot was even more alarming. The press would never be told about the chemical weapons breach. No one was admitting to any weapons of mass destruction. The chemical weapons weren't considered to be weapons of mass destruction, yet Osei didn't understand what other categories the chemical weapons fit under. He also didn't understand why the previous administration hadn't told the truth and cleared themselves. Then he realized telling the truth would have meant having to answer a lot of questions better left unanswered. The hackers of the chemical weapons depot were professionals, and they were good. They laid out a traceable path from London to major cities around the world. When Jeffrey, the lead on Osei's two-man grunt team, notified him, he understood how the FBI became confused. Osei thanked Jeffrey, the red-headed computer geek from MIT, the same school Osei was on staff with before the CIA decided differently. "Jeffrey, why don't you see if they need your help on the IRS hack? Let Shelley know and she'll prepare the paperwork and see if they need you," Osei said. "Sure, boss. But what if she asks me about this job?" Jeffrey asked. Osei knew he was right. Shelley would want to know his progress if he were offering his team up for another assignment. "Tell her I'm on my way to London and will text you any tasks." "Sure thing," Jeffrey replied as he smiled. He too understood the around-the-world IP addresses was a game. The real hack took place in London, exactly where it started. Osei telephoned the travel department and was on an overnight flight to London within 5 hours. He kept an overnight bag packed at work just for this type of situation. He was sure Shelley expected him to fly to the chemical weapons facility and not to London. The travel department booked Osei's seat at the last minute and he was bumped from coach to first class. He wasn't sure if this was a CIA perk or a coincidence. Either way, it was a relief. He could stretch out his long legs and rest his mind, then he'd go over all the information again to be sure he wasn't missing anything. Using IP addresses all over the world usually sent authorities chasing all over the world. This was a hacker's endgame. Confuse the hell out of everyone. Connect to 10 different IP addresses when everything is accomplished using the original IP address. Osei knew it sounded silly, but more hackers than not used this simple technique and most didn't get caught because the original IP address was always in a public place. He didn't want to have to explain this fact to Shelley or anyone. This kind of information was job security. London was as cool as the weather page predicted. Osei checked into the hotel the travel department booked for him. This was his first time in London, and he was surprised by the number of different ethnic groups in the city. Feeling more comfortable on his first assignment, he proceeded to locate the Internet Cafe, where the intrusive act on the US government originated. The Internet Cafe was in an upscale neighborhood within the city limits of London. Osei sat in the boutique Internet Cafe and had a cup of tea while he watched the neighborhood surroundings. He quickly decided the cafe was a front, not really the place where the offense took place. The hacker needed a place with less noise and even fewer distractions. Hacking the US chemical weapons depot was no easy task. Osei went outside and to the left of the cafe was a small boutique hotel with Wi-Fi included in each room. To the right of the cafe was an upscale spa for women. Osei immediately went into the hotel and booked a room for the night. Once inside his room, he opened his laptop to find all the internet connections available in the area, including the Internet Cafe's IP addresses. He found exactly what he was looking for. The hacker or hackers used the Internet Cafe's Wi-Fi while staying in the hotel. What Osei needed now was the law enforcement support to help him locate the hacker or hackers. He immediately called Shelley to ask her to intervene and get the ball rolling with the UK authorities. He needed to know exactly who'd checked into the hotel during the time of the breach. None of this could be done without the support of the local authorities. Gill had no legal right to arrest anyone. "London?" Shelley asked once she got on the phone. "Yes, I found exactly where the hackers breached the depot," Osei replied softly with his sexy voice. He too could add a touch of sex to calm the waters and get what he wanted. Shelley was as shrewd as she was intelligent. She delivered when it counted most. She teased her way right into the heart of the chief of police in London, offering herself as an FBI agent who really cared. Osei was given contact information for the chief's second-in-command. London was not told of the latest chemical addition in the U.S. chemical weapons depot, only that the facility had been breached from their city. Just knowing chemical weapons were involved was enough to get the UK's full attention. Within 2 days, London's police found the possible hackers. Osei was then encouraged by the London authorities to return home. He wanted to speak with the alleged hackers, but London police insisted it wasn't necessary. Osei was new on the job, or he would have demanded to learn more about the alleged hacker. The UK knew all too well the CIA would be more inclined to hire the hacker than send him to prison. They had already figured out that Osei was with the CIA and not the FBI. You couldn't blame the CIA. No one wanted hackers sitting in prison telling other prisoners how they hacked a chemical weapons depot. Extradition of the hacker wasn't requested. Osei allowed the UK to send him home, which was a mistake. Once he arrived back at Langley, he quickly realized his mistake. "Osei, you did a respectable job finding the hacker." There was a pause and Osei knew there was more. "I sent an experienced agent to London to further the investigation. We need to know more about this guy." "Okay, is there anything else I can do?" Osei responded. He knew he'd left the UK far too soon. He should have been more forceful with the UK authorities. "Yes, send the senior agent all the details on the case, and next time, before flying off into the blue, let me know. I can protect you from people who think they know what's best for this country." "Yes, madam," Osei replied softly. "And Osei," Shelley said flatly, "don't madam me, I'm only a couple years older than you." Shelley winked and walked away. "Osei, can I see you in my office for a moment? I have a special assignment for you." "Sure, I'll be right there," Osei replied, happy to see Shelley wasn't angry with him. "Osei, take a seat, one more person will be joining us." Shelley mumbled as she looked through a stack of papers on her desk. Osei sat quietly while Shelley organized herself, and just in time. The section chief of the department walked in and slid into the seat next to Osei. He extended his hand and introduced himself before Shelley began to explain why Osei was called in. "Osei, we keep getting chatter about a 5th and 6th cell which did not activate on 9/11. Normally, we'd let the issue rest due to the enormous number of reports already completed about the 9/11 attacks. However, almost 10 years later, and the chatter continues about Cell 5 and 6. Osei was all ears. This assignment certainly held his interest. The airlines gave us the names of all passengers on flights from the East Coast to the West Coast on that day, particularly on that morning, the section chief added. Shelley took the lead back from the section chief by quickly adding, "We believe the West Coast and East Coast strikes were to coincide with each other. We want you to hack the airline's files and figure out for yourself who the possible 8 cell members were on 2 additional flights bound for California. We believe one flight was headed to Los Angeles and the other flight to San Francisco, and several of these guys used fake IDs using American names." The section chief added, "I'd like to use a different word than hacking." Osei responded quickly, "Sure, I can complete the research." "Good, I will forward the details of the mission to you," Shelley said, as she headed for the door. Osei and the section chief were still sitting in their seats as they looked at one another. Osei said jokingly, "I guess the meeting is over." The section chief chuckled. Osei was elated that he, a new guy, would get to work on a high-profile assignment like 9/11. His mind was moving 1,000 miles a minute, designing programs that would provide the information he needed in the least amount of time. He'd only review previous reports after he'd completed his own report. This was an assignment which had a personal appeal to him. Osei always believed there were additional cells operating on that day, and wondered why these cells weren't activated. His personal thoughts were Cell 5 and Cell 6 were enthralled in fear and couldn't finish the job, but what if there were other reasons? Hacking wasn't exactly the correct word to use for the assignment. The airlines gave the agency access to its records and information. However, he understood Shelley wanted him to dig deeper and into places where access wasn't provided, and she wanted the orders to come from the section chief. That would be the only reason to give the assignment to a non-existent department within the CIA. Reliable chatter was an important part of discerning assignments and missions. Regardless of what reports or politicians from other countries said, the chatter was almost always the most reliable source. Why would the terrorists still be talking about Cell 5 and Cell 6 almost 10 years after the incident? Were they teasing the guys because of a failed mission? Or was the reason a hindrance which they still hadn't gotten over? Osei was aware both planes that hit the Twin Towers were bound for California. He, like Shelley and the section chief, also believed there were plans for at least one other airplane to rain terror in the state of California on that day. His work was cut out for him, and he plans every detail of preparing a software program which would compare names, addresses, and database information on each passenger, on flights from the Northeast to California, on United Airlines and American Airlines on 9/11. He was looking for 4 to 5 passengers on any of the flights who had commonalities, especially same address, birthplace, arrival dates in the United States, commonalities or similarities. He was looking for invisible connections between people. Unlike the section chief, Osei didn't believe the long-distance terrorist flight plan was set to happen at the same time as the Twin Towers attack because of scheduled flight times of the 2 major airlines. He did believe the West Coast attack was to occur later in the day, just when America believed the troubles of the day were over. Osei's goal was to find the potential terrorists and identify why the 5th or 6th attack didn't occur. Was the 5th and 6th cells only a backup? Osei completed the software program within days and then allowed the computers to do the work. Hacking into the airline's information was a piece of cake, as was connecting the FBI's database to identify each passenger on American Airlines and United Airlines flights to California that day. He then connected the image software program to bring up images of each person. Missing information automatically made you a person of interest in Osei's mind. The software program didn't yield any unseen connections between people on any of the flights from the East Coast to the West Coast on 9/11. Osei could feel it in his gut that there were other terrorist cells with 4 to 5 hijackers on airplanes which didn't activate on 9/11. Without proof, his report would say no findings. It was during this time when he was beginning to feel his actions were useless when Shelley walked over to his desk and placed a file in front of him. "Find this child." She then simply turned and walked away. Osei opened the file and it was less than 60 seconds before he'd realized he'd been working on a shadow mission. A mission which is performed to protect the actions of the real mission. The State Department has a weekly complaint from one of the hijackers' mother. She informed the State Department that her son admitted to fathering a child in New York City before he boarded Flight 93, the flight that crashed in Pennsylvania on 9/11. The mother insisted that her son sent her a detailed letter explaining the hookup between himself and this wealthy American white woman who paid a service called Midnight Pleasures to help impregnate her with no strings attached. The mother reported that he received a large sum of money for sleeping with the woman and a handsome bonus when it was determined the woman was pregnant. This hijacker entered the United States on 7 different occasions before 9/11 and was independent of the other cell members. He was 26 years old at the time of his death, and he wanted his mother to know he fathered a child before he died. Osei determined the child would be about 15 years old. Now the real hacking begins. Osei needed to make digital contact with a company named Midnight Pleasures in NYC between 2000 and 2001. He needed to get direct information from the grandmother of the child on the exact dates if she knew, and any other details. As it turned out, the hijacker himself came from a family of wealth, and his mother hired the best international attorney possible to help her find her grandchild. Osei sent a request to the State Department to ask for permission to contact the grandmother or her attorney directly. They were reluctant, yet complied. Osei was only able to communicate with the attorney, and the details were foggy. The mother received the letter from her son in late September of 2000. This means the child was probably born between May and June of 2001. Surprisingly, the grandmother's private investigators gave her the names of 3 women who used the service and were impregnated during this period. Now all Osei had to do was hack the company's files and find which of the 3 women was the mother of the hijacker's child. The work was easy for Osei, and he wondered why the agency placed such a highly classified assignment on his desk. The agency kept track of children whose parents are a person of interest, either due to national security or international affairs. It turns out the child was a boy. Osei included the details in his report. He could only imagine the CIA would set up a file on the child. I can neither confirm nor deny this story was inspired by true events. What I can confirm is Book 3, which is coming soon, is an exciting adventure where cyber terrorism moves quickly across the page.